Hello and welcome to another episode of the Deceptive Reality Podcast.
Woo woo.
My name is Nick. And with me, wooting, is the Potestus Bert.
The Potestus?
Potestus.
Wow. Okay. I am way too stupid to know what that word is. You gotta explain that.
Didn't you pay attention in Latin class?
No, I didn't take Latin class. I'm public school, Nick.
We didn't have it either, but that is Latin, and it means the powerful, Bert. Potestus is power.
Powerful. That's powerful. It's powerful that you said that about me, Nick.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it's powerful. All the equipment you had to set up to get us here tonight.
Oh, my gosh. Listen, if I don't know what my camera will be able to pick up, you're going to have to forgive all the equipment this evening. If you're seeing a whole bunch of stuff, we are cracking the atom over here on how we're going to do this phone interview. So for anyone that doesn't know, I did a podcast over on my channel 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Well, for you guys, it's going to be like a month and something. So it doesn't really.
Yeah. Who knows when that was?
We don't know when this is coming out, but, I did a podcast over there with a gentleman. If you've not watched my podcast, you're going to want to go over and watch my podcast. There was an episode I did. It was called, well, I've changed the title of it. It doesn't matter. Listen, it's on a man named Joe. Okay. And Joe had an amazing story. And I said it would be perfect for this podcast also. Surprisingly enough, we've actually recorded this interview once before, and it things did not go as planned. Audio wise, we had a lot of audio glitches, and I was able to fix most of it on my podcast. So now we're finagling a completely different system. We're going to hope and pray that it works correctly. Good old Discord coming in clutch if it does work. And so far, before we've gotten on here, everything's went pretty clean.
Knock on wood.
I'm pretty sure my desk is wood.
Yeah.
At least
knock on chipboard.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we're going to do, which is going to be a little bit different than the norm. Usually, as you guys know, there's typically narration that we create around the story, and then Nick and I talk about it. This one is different. I'm using my podcast that I cut into 17 different segments. Now, my podcast, I think with what I edited out, it's like 52 minutes. But it's going to be cut into 17 different segments. We're going to talk about what I would consider key points within that podcast. And then we're going to have the opportunity to talk to Joe, which Joe and I have talked a little bit on my podcast. We haven't been able to do it in depth, but it's just going to be just like we're sitting down and just chilling and relaxing and talking to a lifelong friend. Speaking of which, let's get him in here. The man, the myth, and the legend, my man, Joe. What's up, Joe?
Hey, Joe.
What's up? How you guys doing tonight?
Oh, man, we got some audio working so far, boys and girls. Woo.
Yeah, we did have some problems, didn't we?
We did. Yeah. But listen, not tonight.
We can only hope. The last time, actually the last two times, it's too hard to call a coincidence. It was just to say nerve-wracking was after that interview, I said, I hope further interviews go a little smoother than that one.
Believe it or not, Discord, we use Discord all the time. For anyone that doesn't know, Discord is it's like a voice server that a lot of gamers use. And Nick and I was well versed with it. That's probably where we really spent the most of our time talking is Discord.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So for this,
home away from home.
I mean, idealistically, if you can't do Riverside, which is what we typically use, which Riverside, you've been a bad boy occasionally with us, but this hopefully, cross our fingers, will work well for this. It'd be like a call-in to a degree, is the best way that I could put it. Right. Now, surprisingly enough, I'm just making sure you guys are probably thinking I'm looking around like I'm a squirrel or something, in which I am squirreling a little bit, because I've got to work audio across multiple things here so everyone can hear it. For you guys in the homeland or listening on all of our different services for podcasts, it'll look seamless, but unfortunately, I'm going to look like a squirrel for a little bit. So sorry.
We'll just cut away from you every time you have to to look around.
Yeah, that's probably a smart thing to do, if we're being honest. I was just looking through the numbers and make sure everything downloaded, and it looks like it did. All right. So I think that what we should really do, because to understand who Joe is, we got to kind of start from the beginning. Everyone needs to understand what we know about Joe. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, before we get too deep into my narration, it's like I'm the narrator this week. I'm super excited about this.
You are the narrator.
I am the narrator. Wow. I knew this day would come.
You are Deceptive Dave.
I'm Deceptive Dave. But for anyone that doesn't know, Joe was a child that was being babysit on Lindley Street. So it's the Lindley Street poltergeist is what it's known as. And it's a super interesting story. There's police records out the yin for this thing. How everything worked out was originally, I did a podcast just on Lindley Street. And then this random guy is in my DMs. Weirdest thing I think I've ever said. But he was like, hey, hit me up. So through trial and error and getting some connections with some of our people, and then I got over to him, and lo and behold, he was able to verify some stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the little boy that I was talking about in that episode. So he was gracious enough to come along and tell his story.
Oh, when I first saw the video that you had put out, I knew right away, before anything was said, when I saw the boy in the bed, I said, that's me. I mean, it was, I couldn't actually believe what I was seeing at the time. And it was just, it was, I was like speechless and breathless all at the same time. And I'm like, well, how did he hear about me? And I had just downloaded TikTok, I think the week before. I'd had it originally, got rid of it because there was just too much. I see too much controversy on there and videos that I don't care to watch. But then I got bored and I downloaded it again. And within a couple of days, I see your video that you put out. So I'm like, I got to see how this guy found out about me. And he's probably going to think I'm a screwball just because a lot of people write in and you know, so yeah, you did your little verification thing and you figured out it was me. And so we went from there, we started talking and I got to tell you the whole story. And, being the last survivor basically of that house is something I thought I was going to take with me out of this world and into the next. But I finally I had the courage to come forward and put it out there publicly. I mean, we know other people know before it got to you, but you were basically really the first interview I did on it. And so, I mean, to see that video was I just knew. And it was funny because that was basically the look I had in my eyes that night was just horror, and I was just terrified.
Well, and that's the big thing. We're going to be covering that. For anyone that doesn't know, we'll be covering that in today's story. But basically, Joe and I, we did a interview on my channel, and then I pieced it together. The interview is still going to come out, and I've been holding off on that a little bit. And the reason for that is, well, I'm adding two things for Joe, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to finagle that in there. But in addition to that, YouTube has not been super nice to the video that I did put out. So I'm trying to figure out how to... what's the word? I'm being careful with my wording here. I'm trying to figure out how YouTube will like my video a little bit more to where it doesn't hold down, because I've had 0 YouTube suggestions for that video.
Really?
The only people that's been able to watch that video is people that's either searched for Lindley Street or they specifically looked on my channel. YouTube hasn't suggested it at all.
That's abnormal on its own.
Yeah.
Maybe we got to do a story just on that.
Yeah, no doubt we should. Here's the weird thing, because I was like, usually the way that I figure if I've done something that YouTube doesn't, that they don't like, is I'll try to run a promotion directly through YouTube. And if it cancels, then I know I did something wrong. There's something in the video it just doesn't like. And I tried that today just out of curiosity. I'm like, what if I put like $1 on there, which you'll get like 10 views for like $1. But I'm like, wonder what happens if I just put on there and they rejected the promotion.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, in our story, in my story, as I'm telling you guys, is one, and it's widely known too, that the police chief at that time, Walsh, he didn't. He wanted the whole situation resolved as quickly as possible. So there's negativity in there towards the police department, even though it's really not on our part. But we're telling the story, and like you were saying, with what they like and what they don't like, and why they won't promote such a video or this or that, is could be for so many different reasons that I don't know personally. I mean, and you guys could probably speculate, but I know that there's been a lot said about Lindley Street, and some of the things, maybe some of the things they don't want people to know. I don't know, because there was a lot of cover-ups, and there was a lot of speculation on this whole situation that happened in that house. And as we get through this interview, the audience will start to understand that what we're talking about.
Well, and I think YouTube is so much more nuanced than that. I think there is a lot of subjects that I know is inside the podcast. I try to protect it as much as I could by reducing certain wordings, and you guys will understand that as we go along. For those of you that watch on the YouTube machine, you'll actually see the video that was from my podcast, but of course there'll be us cutting in between each one of those. I know there's at least 2 subjects that YouTube hates, so I can only assume it's one of those 2 things. But they're key things within the story. So I mean, to take it out, it takes away from the story. So it's almost like, well, do you leave it there and wait till someone searches for that specifically, or do you take it out, contaminate part of the story, and then hope YouTube likes it then? And even then, you don't know. I mean, I've been working with YouTube since 2016, and every time I feel like I know it, they change something. So you never really know. I
know, Bert, when we did our podcast, we did all of that. I tried on my part to dress down a lot of the situations that were extremely graphic.
Yeah.
To not get too explanatory with certain things that happened, but to still tell my story and be truthful. And that might not make sense to a lot of people, but when you're reliving this stuff, it's kind of hard to block out a lot of the stuff, that the horrific and the terrific stuff that happened, that to try to skip certain parts so that not to offend anybody, including YouTube, but generally the audience out there. But my story isn't for the faint-hearted. It just isn't. It was 50 years of this, what we're getting ready to get into.
It's a shame that YouTube does over police this, because this is a fascinating story that I think is important for people to hear and important for Joe to tell. And I think everyone should keep in mind that, as terrifying as it can sound in this podcast, like Joe said, it was toned down. Imagine living through something like that as a young boy and all throughout your life. So keep that in mind.
Right. Well, and that's the hard part. YouTube, I understand why they do what they do. I can totally understand it. But like in the same regards, it's complicated because, we are trying to tell a story. Mm-hmm. And we want it to make sense as far as to remove, like I said, to remove parts of this story takes away from the entire narrative and story. So it's trying to find that happy medium between what makes YouTube happy and what's going to make the viewers have this story make sense.
Right.
So, and speaking of which, I don't want to hold you guys just sitting here wondering what the heck is going on anymore. Let's at least get to the first segment and then we'll come back to it. Are y'all ready to start the story of Mr. Joe?
Let's go.
Before little Joey could step foot in the Gooden household, his life was marked with both turmoil as well as dysfunction. Born in Bridgeport at St. Vincent's Hospital in 1966, Joey's early life was overflowing with instability as well as dysfunction. His parents' troubled relationship, it only lasted 5 years. That exposed Joey to scenes that no child should ever witness. Their separation, it led Joey and his mother to move frequently, seeking stability, but finding very little. They eventually settled in an apartment on Federal Street in Bridgeport, a place with its own challenges. In a twist of fate, Joey's mother became involved with a notorious biker gang.
They were called the Pagans, and they had a chapter in Bridgeport at the time, and my mother kind of hooked up with the leader of that gang, and they moved into our place on Federal Street.
Life with the biker gang was both chaotic as well as perilous. Now that added to the instability that Joey had known since his parents' separation, but despite these challenges, the true horrors of Joey's life would later unfold during his stay with the Goodens. His early experiences with the biker gang, they were but a shadow of the supernatural terrors yet to come. In the middle of 1972, Joey's mother brought him to Laura and Jerry's house for the very first time. When Laura opened the door,
Come on in.
she greeted Joey with a warm smile,
Don't you remember me?
asked if he remembered her. Now Joey, he was feeling shy and unsure. He didn't remember Laura, but her kindness was evident from the very start. Now Joey's first day at the Gooden house, it did take a terrifying turn within the first hour and a half. Laura noticed that Joey's clothes, they were dirty. They didn't fit him right. And worst of all, he had lice in his hair. Determined to help, she drew a bath. She filled it with bubble bath. After settling Joey into the tub, Laura stepped out of the bathroom, promising to be right back.
I'll be right back.
As soon as she left out of the bathroom, the door slammed shut, and I got dunked under the water. And I was trying to get up and kicking, and I was being held down by my head, and I passed out.
When Joey regained consciousness, he found himself beside the tub with Laura by his side.
Joey, wake up.
She believed that Joey had fallen and hit his head, thinking that he had gotten out of the tub, slammed the door, and slipped and fell. But Joey knew the truth. He had been held under the water by an unseen force, a malevolent presence that made itself known within hours of his arrival at the Gooden household. Now, though this was his very first visit to the home, there would be many to follow. Joey's stay at the Goodens house, they became more frequent and longer in duration. Initially, his mother would just go and pick him up. But over time, she began to leave him there for extended periods. Now, despite this, Laura and Jerry, they welcomed Joey and treated him with love and care. But not everything in the household had his best intentions in mind.
So obviously, rough start at life. I would definitely say a rough start for you, Joe.
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, people come from hardships. The early 70s was it was a different world. People were different. People acted different. My mother had me at a real young age, and my dad was much older than her at the time, and it was kind of a forced marriage. So it didn't work out. It lasted 5 years, and ended up bouncing around with my mom. And lo and behold, we ended up with a motorcycle gang, and it was just it was like the beginning of the hell of my life. It just got worse, progressively worse.
Now, you know something, Joe, something I always thought about ever since I've started talking to you about this entire situation. I feel like, and Nick and I, we've done a decent amount of, just even here on Deceptive Reality, we've done a decent amount of stories just on hauntings and possessions and stuff like that. I always felt like demons don't necessarily target people, but I can tell you firsthand that here's a prime example. When I was a kid, there was a house that my grandparents used to live in that I always thought it was like haunted. That was the first thing I thought, because you would hear footsteps going up and down the stairway when no one was there. So when they moved out, I thought, well, surely the next people that would move in there is going to have the same experience. Like, how crazy is it going to be for them? We got word that they didn't have any of that happen. So
that's fairly common, really.
Which is weird to me, though, because it's like, if we experienced it, you would think everyone would experience it.
Right. Do you think there's something that separates people from these experiences?
That's what I'm curious about. And that's what I was going to ask Joe. Like, do you think that sometimes maybe some of this stuff targets people, or do you think it's the energy that may have drawn them to you, Joe? Do you have a concept of what you think it might have been?
It's like this. There's more than one. I'm going to use the word entity. You have straight demonic. You have wandering spirits that are, still here, refusing to leave. And so a lot of times you don't know what you have in the house. And that's why, you had people like Ed and Lorraine Warren that studied on this, because there's more than one type of entity. You have the more or less harmless ones that they'll make sounds. They might just bang and flip the lights on and off on you, and they're just letting their presence be known. And then you have the type that we had at 966 Lindley Street, which were straight demonic, straight. I call them Satan's army, because that's what they were, and they have an agenda. What they don't stay in one place like a headquarters. Just like any army, they move, and they move to other places. What they accomplish, what they're there to do, and then they move on. I took them for 50 years, and I lived in both Connecticut, Massachusetts, South Carolina for a few years, finally settled in Florida, and they never left, and that's where they came from.
I think one of the things that I'm curious about is, it seems like, and we've talked about this numerous times too, Nick, sometimes a lot of that stuff will feed off of some of those childhood energies. It's kind of like if we look at the Montauk Project, it's almost like even our government has tried to use that before.
Yeah. A lot of it's strong emotions or, pent up energy. And that's why a lot of time kids are the first ones to experience it, or sometimes the only ones to experience it. So I think that would make a lot of sense in this case.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, when we talk about, specifically with the cases we've covered, in this case, Joe came from a very difficult start. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Joe, but I'm going to assume as a child, there was probably a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety before you even got to the Goodens family. Would that be an accurate statement, or am I embellishing?
No, that's an accurate statement, because once the pagan motorcycle gang moved in the house on Federal Street, on any night, there would be 25 or more motorcycles parked up and down the street. We lived on the second floor. There was good people in that neighborhood that had to go to work the next day, and there was no sleeping while they made our apartment their clubhouse. There was no sleeping for me, and there was no sleeping for any of the neighbors. The cops were called, I don't know how many times. I mean, these motorcycle guys were so tough, and they would throw beer bottles out of the second floor window at the cops and tell them to get out of here. 2 or 3 police cars would come up. I mean, like I said, it was a different time than it is now. You couldn't do that now, because there'd be more repercussions than there was then. So yeah, it was being locked in a back bedroom every night and just listening to them fighting and doing things out there, and just, you could hear the whole house shake sometimes.
So you got to figure, Nick, kind of like what we've talked about in the past, you have this situation where they're maybe looking for this energy. You have someone like Joe that steps in and they're like, ooh, baby, this is exactly what we need. We got someone who's anxious, that's got a rough upbringing, that life is tough. Like, this really feeds into what we've talked about in all these other stories. I mean, it's almost case in point, but of course now we have someone that can validate that versus us speculating on it.
Right.
My mother, Bert, my mother, when she was 13, she was in a reformatory school, an all-girl reformatory school. She was completely out of control, and my grandmother and my grandfather couldn't handle her anymore. She was drinking and smoking and playing with Ouija boards, and she was just constantly in trouble, skipping school, stealing. The list went on and on and on with her. And so she was the I don't care attitude. And a lot of times during my lifetime, having these demons in me all this time, I would ask them outright, did my mother make a deal? Did my mother make a deal for me? I don't have nothing to do with it. I would tell them for them to leave me, for them to leave me alone. You know, like, in other words, did my mother sell me to you guys? You know, you don't know what to think when you're actually living through something like this, other than to just have questions as to why, why me? Why Marcy too, but why me?
Did you ever get any answers when you asked that kind of stuff?
No, they gave me the answer the first night they manifested in front of me. And I didn't figure it out till maybe 30 years later, when they said that they were waiting for me. You know, so they knew I was coming. So if they knew I was coming, they knew Marcy was there. And, you know, I believe they play with our timeline as if it's a 2-year-old's toy. Everybody's under the impression that what these demons do is hocus pocus. It's not. It's an otherworldly technology that we can't comprehend or even begin to wrap our minds around. What we have is like considered the equivalent of a toenail clipper to what they have and what they can do with live organic type of technology. Like I said, that we just can't understand. I've seen it. They've showed me things. I don't understand what it is, but I seen what it can do. But so I know it's not abracadabra. They wave a magic wand. It's people want to believe it's that because it's something that they couldn't understand if they actually saw it. And like I said, I still can't. They had me for 50 years and said a lot of things and showed me a lot of things that they thought that would never come to light or that I would never speak about.
Out of curiosity, Joe, I know that you had mentioned that your mom had messed with some what we would consider occult things, like the Ouija board and stuff like that. I can't remember if you've ever told me, how did she meet Laura? Do you remember?
He met Laura through my grandmother's sister. And I think my mother actually babysat a couple of times for her son that passed away. I think he was Jerry Jr.
You know, something that, and this is just me going off on my little left-handed tangent to a degree. The fact that she opened up doors herself, whether she meant to inadvertently or what she did or did not agree to, I would question if they put some of this in motion themselves. And by that, what I mean is, if they would have already had some type of foothold at the Goodens' home, who's to say that they didn't put some of this in motion to get you over there, knowing what your energy was going to be? You know what I mean?
How do you say energy? Because every time my mother would drop me off, as soon as we would be on the sidewalk in front of the house, and I would just feel this pressure. That's what I still call it to this day, but you can consider it an energy. It's almost as if the house was alive. It was just, and when you got to the basement, it felt like you were in the heart. the pressure and of wanting to feeling of being overwhelmed, but you don't know why. You know, I found out afterward as we get into the story why the basement was so terrifying. For
sure. Speaking of which, I do want to move on to the next segment. Do you have any other questions about this one, Nick?
No, I think we're good here. I definitely think that, Joe, I think your life would have been way different if the whole motorcycle gang didn't happen, because, and it's odd that they're called the Pagans too. It seems like almost they were placed there for a purpose, but not one you'd appreciate for sure.
No, they were like some of the most ruthless guys that you know, that you wouldn't want to run into in a dark alley, because you know they probably wouldn't let you out of there alive. I mean, they were just those type of guys. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I got slapped in the back of the head just walking by, just because they thought it was funny. Yeah, they were bad characters.
Which goes back to what I was saying. To say that they didn't put some of these things in motion. I mean, we see it in every horror movie, of course, that's Hollywood written, but I mean, this is a prime example where who's to say that the demonic realm couldn't potentially put two people in the same, you know, we talk all the time about if you're a religious person, sometimes we feel like God puts someone in our path that helps either us or that other person from time to time. Who's to say that it's not happening on the other side? So your mom meeting this biker gang leader, which she then started kind of getting with a little bit, who's to say that that wasn't put into motion somewhat, which we don't know. It could have just been dumb luck, or bad luck, I guess, in this case. But, you know, in the same regard, like, we just don't know. But it makes you think, it makes you stop and go, who's to say that this wasn't orchestrated from something dark?
Because everything would have been different. Everything.
Right.
If I, you know, as a child, you know, you see things differently. As now I'm a grown man, that I can understand the situations that were going around, that were happening around me. I didn't understand then. I couldn't comprehend a lot of it. But as you get older and you reflect, you figure things out that you couldn't figure out then. And, you know, in my situation, you know, one thing, when I was telling Tony Spera from the New England Society for Paranormal Research, when he was doing the investigation on me, and I got to certain parts of this motorcycle gang, I had to start thinking about this because of what unfolded, the events that unfolded from the meeting, my mother meeting this motorcycle gang, then moving in, and then what happened to both of us almost seems like it was laid out to happen that way. As traumatic and horrific as it was, it almost feels like it was written to that it was supposed. This is me now. I'm the grown up. I'm not the Joey. I'm the Joe right now. I'm the grown man who's tried to wrestle with this in his mind for 50 years to come to some conclusion so I can have peace, a little bit of peace on my part as to the big thing. Why? Why did it have to be A, B, C, D, and being the worst thing that could happen in the end?
For sure. Well, to make sure that I want to make sure we leave a lot of the story still in there. Let's go to the next segment, and we're going to obviously build on what's already happened, which is pretty significant. I mean, let's be honest, at the end of the last one, you know, his first encounter, even at the Goodens, pretty traumatic. It's definitely one that I don't think anyone would fully anticipate, and which when we come back, I do want to talk about that one little segment again. But let's go to segment 2. We're going to build off of segment 2. We'll come back to that one small part in segment 1 that I kind of do want to cover, but let's go to segment 2 first.
Now, initially, Joey's stay at the Gooden household, they were relatively calm. Activity would happen, but even Joey sometimes could explain it away. It wasn't until a couple of months later that he began to notice things that defied explanation. Joey and Marcia, the Gooden's adopted daughter, they sensed more than the adults did, even though their understanding was limited. Now, for Marcia, these mysterious occurrences were interactions with, well, with their friends.
One of the biggest things was I came out of the kitchen. The first big thing that I saw physically, was Marcy called me to her bedroom and said she had all these stuffed animals on the floor, spread out. She jumped on her bed, raised her arms up, and every one of them hit the ceiling and like stayed there, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 seconds till she dropped her arms, and they all rained down on the carpet. And she says, "See, I can do magic."
Skeptical, Joey dismissed Marcia's claim, insisting that she hadn't done it. Marcia then jumped off the bed and moved about 6 foot away from the door. Suddenly, the door slammed shut on its own. Joey heard a voice from the other side.
"Yes, I did."
It was not her voice that yelled that through the door to me. And I just backed away.
As time went on, the strange occurrences at the Gooden household became more frequent and disturbing. Objects began moving on their own, defying the laws of physics and leaving Joey in a state of constant unease.
The TV did float. It actually swung like a pendulum more than once. A lot of times the TV would just flip over. You could put it in the stand 3 times, check it, boom. Before you even turned around, it was on the floor again. Same thing with chairs in the kitchen. Slide away from the table, tip over. You just left the room, and now all 4 or 5 chairs are away from the table and all tipped over.
Marcia's TV would even move from her dresser to her bed. On one occasion, it fell from her dresser about 5 feet, yet it didn't even break. Now, Jerry picked up the TV and he plugged it in. When he plugged it in, he found that it worked completely fine. Now, the relentless movement of objects, from flipping TVs to sliding chairs, they created an atmosphere of constant tension and fear. Now, these eerie events, they marked the very beginning of Joey's deeper descent into the supernatural chaos known as the Gooden household.
So, a moment of truth here. I create my podcasts, I listen to it once, and then I don't ever listen to it typically again. I've listened to my podcast 3 times myself personally, just because I've been interested in the story. But I've not listened to it in like 3 weeks. And I'm probably going to have to clean my chair because I forgot about that demon after the door closed.
I noticed you're clutching your chest there.
Scared me half to death. I'm going to have to clean this chair. Woo. That was scary. All right. Well, Joe, did I depict that scene correctly?
Yeah, pretty much.
That would, it scared me as a 45-year-old man. So I could only assume. Before we jump into that segment, though, as far as, talking about it, I did want to go back to segment 1 because there's something that we didn't cover that I wanted to cover. Now, obviously, Joe, when you first went over to the Goodens, and obviously they threw you in the bathtub, and then Laura left, and that door slammed, and you got dunked underneath the water.
Well, before I got dunked under the water, it happened so fast, but I could see the door shut. It started slow, and then it just went boom, and it kind of shook me because it was pretty loud. And I sat up, looked at it for a second, and when I sat up, I just felt something on my head push me down under the water. I was fighting kicking with my legs, and you're being drowned. You want to get air again. So but no matter what I did, and no matter how hard I struggled, the grip just got stronger. I was held under there, and I passed out. And I don't remember anything after that until I woke up on the side of the tub and Laura was there. And she thought that I got out of the tub, closed the door, and got back in, or was trying to get back in, and fell and hit my head. But I knew that wasn't what happened, and I don't even know how I ended up getting out of the tub, because I was on the side of the tub, and she's standing over me. So she was convinced that I did. So I didn't. You don't argue with your elders. So I just didn't say anything, but I knew what happened, but I couldn't explain it because I'd never been involved or around anything like this before. To me, this was the first thing that was something that happened, and I think I was probably 7 at this time.
Yeah, and that was my biggest question, was when that first started happening, did you understand what was going on? But the fact that you felt the hand on top of your head and pushed down clearly. Now, it'd still be confusing, though, because you'd never had any kind of experiences like that before, correct?
Yeah, I never had anything that was out of the physical that you could see in this world, out of the ordinary, until that day that happened. And I still did not understand what happened. When you get enough people that keep telling you, you slipped, you got out of the tub, you slipped, you got out of the tub, you start to even question yourself. But I know what happened. Till the day I die, that's the story I'm going to tell, because that's what happened.
For sure.
I'm curious, like, listening to that part and also the future segments, it seems like the experience between you and was it Marcia? Is that the name that I was hearing?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what her birth given name was, but we called her Marcy.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll call her. I guess I'll call her Marcy too, just so you're familiar with it. But it seems like the experience you two had was radically different. Like, it was a friend to her, but it was immediately aggressive to you. Have you ever thought about why it might have presented that way differently for you both?
Yeah, because she had already made friends with them and accepted them in. So I don't know if people will understand. There's a veil over our eyes that we can only see what's really going on in this world that we're in, this physical world. But when you go through the experience that me and Marcy went through, that veil gets lifted, because you've already seen something that nobody is supposed to see. And most people that would see would be completely terrified. It would be too much of an overload on their brain. They could end up in a mental institution because it's too much for the brain to absorb. And as a child, you're a little more, like I said, Marcy made friends with them.
Do you think they started aggressive with her too, or were they friendly right from the start with her?
They were very friendly with her, because they had her convinced that she was doing these things, these phenomenon, like making the stuffed animals float and other things. They led her to believe that she had the power and she was doing it. And that's why the day that I said that to her, I knew it wasn't her. I couldn't explain what it was, but the power, the energy was not coming from her as much as it was coming from the room. It was almost as if there was a big vacuum got turned on and sucked all them stuffed animals to the ceiling.
For sure. If you think about it, though, Nick, all the hauntings like we've covered, when there's multiple children involved, there's almost always one central point.
Right.
So, and the way that I would look at this, and maybe, again, this is me speculating, this is completely different than probably what Joe would say, but just based on other stories that we've conducted, let's use like Enfield is probably the best example I can use, because there was, 4 kids. The entity only really worked through Janet for the most part. That was who it talked through. That was the one that it threw up into the air. it was the one that they threw out the door. I think that it wasn't that they was nice to the other ones, but I think that the main thing that it's trying to go off of is that fear tactic or that scare. It needs that energy. And it even goes back to, if you remember in Infield, they talked about, that was when I can't remember the gentleman's name, it's been too long, but he started questioning the entity and he's like, why are you using the kids? And it said, for the energy.
Right.
But like with Montauk, and for anyone that hasn't watched those episodes, you probably need to go back and watch those episodes so you understand what we're talking about. But the big thing with Montauk is they used fear.
Mm-hmm.
Fear was one of the key things to get that energy up. And I've personally always felt like if there's anxiety or fear, there is a certain energy that you give off. Because if you think about it, and I think anyone that has an animal will understand this. If you're anxious or you have fear, your dog picks up on that.
Yeah.
Now the question is why.
I don't know if you know the author H.P. Lovecraft, but he said the oldest and strongest fear of mankind, or the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind, is fear. That's
Right.
the first emotion that we developed.
So you figure if that's true, if a dog can sense the energy, happiness, I'm sure, is its own energy also. I totally get that part. But it's probably like broadband versus fiber optic, right? Could you use happiness? Yeah, but you're going to get way more out of fear.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's harder to hide fear than it is to hide happiness.
So, in this case, 100%. So you got Marcia that has her two adopted parents that's showing constant love and devotion. Then you've got Joe that has this tough upbringing. He's in constant fear already before he even gets there. This is like a perfect candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you was doing a job resume, the demons go, check, 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 perfect. Hired.
Yep.
I don't know. That's just where my thought process was on that entire thing.
I think I'm on the same track.
I do find it interesting, though, whenever we talk about these stories, it's not uncommon for those emotions to be such a huge part of every single one of these. It's here's another great example, like the podcast that I've got coming out this week and next week. Let me tell you, they're bangers. I don't ever promote my podcast. These are two of the scariest stories I think I've had, with the exception of Joe's, that I've not done an interview for, but they both revolve around fear. And one of them was so freaking scary. I'm like, if that happened to me, I would have just died. I'm just being honest. I'd have just died. Yep. He's a goner, boys. Wrap it up. But they would have made it beautiful video games. But yeah, I do find it interesting. And then obviously in the second part of this, kind of what we listen to, when we talk about Marcy and them obviously being the friends, I think, and we're going to get into this obviously significantly later also when we talk about some of the stuff that happened with her and what she had going on. But when you think about it, for Marcia, she is like, I have this great, amazing gift. Like they're giving her that power, but she sees it like a gift. And that, to a degree, makes for complications too.
Yeah, but whenever any of these phenomenon that she thought she was making happen, the look in her eye, it was scary. It was scary to look at her when she changed. That's what I call it. She would change. She would go from being a 10-year-old girl to having this look that in her eyes that was so hate-filled and scary. She could be. I always tried to say on her good side, because she could flip in a second, is what she would do. If she saw me too happy, I'd have to bring it in, or else she would completely turn and make it an unhappy situation. So she had that thing in her where she went both ways, but almost like flipping a light switch.
That makes sense.
That sounds like part of a manipulation too.
Which, what does demons do?
Manipulate.
They're manipulators. 100%. They manipulate the truth. That's how they get away with it. Which obviously, I know I'm pushing us along on this bad boy, but I do want to go to the next segment. I want to keep this somewhat moving. We're about an hour in. My fear is with what we've got left, this is probably going to be a two-parter, which I would hate to do this as a two-parter, sure. But I think it's going to have to be to make sure we're not missing parts of the story. I think it's important that we tell the full story and we make sure that it goes at a pretty even pace, but I do want to get this thing moving because there is 51 minutes of narration. So I figure worst case scenario, this is probably going to be 3 to 4 hours. So we got almost an hour just narration, but is there anything you can think of that you'd have a question on or that you want to talk about in this last segment?
Oh, let's roll forward to the next one. We'll keep it going for the benefit of the viewer.
That's right.
Yeah.
But there's going to be a two-parter. Don't you dare yell at me, Mom. You like two-parters now.
She'll like it. She'll like it.
As Joey's mother began leaving him at the Goodens more frequently, he found himself sleeping in the recliner. But this recliner, it had a mind of its own.
That recliner hurt me. That recliner, falling asleep sometimes, it would throw you off. It would completely jackknife and squish you inside. A lot of times, I just took my blanket and went to finish going to sleep on the floor because it was too much. It was like putting a quarter in one of those Bronco Bulls.
Laura, seeing Joey on the floor multiple times, decided that he needed someplace that he could sleep. So they got him an old and sturdy roll-away bed. Likely it came from the neighbors. Now this bed was heavy, it was wide, and it seemed like the perfect solution.
From the first night that I went to sleep in that bed, I never woke up in the same room again. Yes, it did have wheels, but the thing was wider than most of the door frames, and there would be times that I would open my eyes in the kitchen, all the table and chairs pushed over to one side, and the bed laying the long way like that, and that little boy Joey just sleeping away.
Jerry and Laura was completely baffled. Each morning, Joey would wake up in a different room, despite the bed being way too large to have go between the door frames. The unexplained movement, it became a regular occurrence, causing distress in the household. Now, one morning, Joey woke up in Marcia's room, prompting her to scream in terror. To prevent further interruptions, Jerry placed objects under each wheel, hoping to keep, if anything, the bed stationary.
When they set the bed in the living room, Jerry put something under each wheel. And I remember him saying to me, he goes, "That ought to hold you, slugger." Like he had all these things jammed under all 4 wheels of this thing, and woke up in the hallway. And he looked back, and all those things that he had placed were still in the perfect spots. I still don't know how I moved.
You know, something I find interesting about that entire segment is, and I know I'm jumping to the end of that segment, but I find it so interesting, is that the rollaway bed moves, but those sandbags are still in the same exact area as where they initiated. So it's almost like it teleported through, and clearly it didn't. I'm sure it was just manipulated somehow, but I always find that part interesting because how many times again have we looked at paranormal stories where, and I actually found this out when I did my story on the Dandy House. Something that was interesting was it was their son was laying in bed and he had a whole bunch of those magazines. And if you remember those old magazines, they were super slippery. And on top of that, or I'm sorry, below that, I believe was the chessboard, and the chessboard was slid out and fell and hit him in the chest, but those magazines stayed put.
Oh,
and it's
weird.
always interesting because you sit there and you think, well, it's being manipulated somehow. But why and how? You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
I never woke up one time in all the times that I was moved in the various rooms in that little house. I never woke up during the time that I was being moved. So it's always been something that's always kind of back in the back of my mind. How did they make it? Did they turn it sideways? And you know, we couldn't figure it out. I mean, Jerry scratched his head when I went in the kitchen because the kitchen had the smallest door frame in the house.
Right.
See, that's what a lot of people don't know. All the other door frames in that house were the standard regular door frame size that followed from one door to the next, which they were still tiny door frames. You could not roll this bed through there. You would have had to pick it up and carry it in there sideways. Would have been the only way. And there's no way I was 7 years old that I was doing that.
So at this stage, he must have known something was up and it wasn't you, because the things he seemed to place under the wheels, he kind of knew that you weren't moving them. Otherwise, you could have just gone and moved them. He seemed to already know that something was up. Was that the impression that you got?
To me, I couldn't explain it. So, to myself, I came up with, I must be doing it somehow. You know, but that one night when after the day after I woke up in Marcy's room and she was upset about it, and she really thought that I pushed the bed in there, and so she was visibly shaken about it. So Jerry wanted to do something about it, and he basically had put these pillows under each window, under each wheel, and they were in the same exact spot when I woke up in the hall that night. And he's just looking back like, how would I have been able to manipulate that bed out of there without disrupting one of them pillows? At least one of them turned one way, but they weren't. They were all just how he laid them out.
And this was a pretty heavy, sturdy bed too, right?
He has a rollaway.
It was it was 1973, and the bed was probably about 10 years older, so it wasn't new. And they did build them a little more. They weren't made out of aluminum. They were made out of metal, and they had a big, really thick mattress on it. It wasn't like a cot. It was really like a bed, but just for a single person.
And you know what I think? And again, Joe has never said this, and he would probably tell me I'm wrong on this. But you know what my theory is on this, Nick? This would be like me and you talking if we listen to a segment.
Right.
We talk about, or should I say, I guess I talk about, I should be like the poster child for this entire thought process. I believe that realm is a completely different dimensional plane. Right? Like we question, how did it get from this room to that room, but yet it couldn't make it through the doorway? I think what happens is when those planes start kind of intertwining, if they're able to bring whatever that is, and it'd be like, to a degree, like you as a game developer, you're just T-posing something, you're moving it to the next section, but everything else around it's going to stay the same.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of what I was getting at with it being heavy and metal. Like if Joe, when he was a kid, was like lifting this up on its side to fit it through doorways, I would think it would make a lot of noise and wake someone up, especially if this keeps happening. Plus, it sounds like when it went into Marcy's room, it didn't wake her up either. And she just sort of come to after it had all happened.
Right.
And that's why I think sort of supports your idea. Did I get that right, Joe? Was it like she woke up later, not while it was happening, but after, right?
No, it was like the standard time to get up in the morning, and like
right.
I was still sleeping, but she'd woken up first, and her scream is what jolted me right out of my sleep. And but again, I don't know what time I was moved in her room that night, but she woke up first. And if she'd woken up any time other than that during the night, that scream would have came earlier. So obviously I got in there so quiet that she, you know, and they never heard me. I woke up in Laura and Jerry's room probably 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, and I just don't think it's possible for a kid to do that with a heavy bed like that.
No, and the mattress would have came off, and
right.
You know, there's no way that I would have had to move it in sections, and you know, I'm 7 years old. Come on, I think I weighed maybe 70 pounds.
Yeah, something was up.
When we talk about UFOs, also, right? We talk about UFOs and how they almost look like they're skipping, like a rock skipping on top of the water. What one of the theories is, it's because that dimension is warping, or it's almost like it's on top of each other. So it gives the impression that it's jumping, but it's really not. It's just as it's going from one dimension to the next, it's like disappearing. That's my theory on the whole bed thing. It's like they're pulling that entire everything into their dimension. They're moving it, and then boop, it's back in this dimension.
Yeah, completely silent. So that's the only way, really, and not disturbing the pillows.
Correct. It's a very weird thought process.
I think you've both touched on that a little bit with your explanations, both you and Joe, talking a little bit about that, but I think it matches up.
Yes.
It's just a form of technology that we can't understand.
Exactly.
But I do want everyone to know, this isn't what Joe's told me. This is my theory on this. So Joe could have something completely different. Don't put those words in his mouth. That's just me talking out loud. My crazy Bert talk. But
yeah, it's the technology part that Joe was talking about that sort of lines up with what you're talking about.
Right.
Like, this seems impossible for us, but to them, what was the way you used it earlier? Our technology is like a nail clipper compared to their technology. Like, they can do this stuff easily.
The only reason we have this technology is because of them. We were going way too slow with to getting to the end, you know, to get into to where this earth, this world is over with. You know, I always said it, and they've said it, that for 300 years, you know, you're on horseback and buggy, you know, from the 1600s all the way into the 1900s. Early 1900s, everything was still horse and buggy or a steam train or this or that, and all of a sudden something happened from like 1915 to 1950 to where the technology just all of a sudden we got smarter, and that was technology wasn't it. It's a double-edged sword. And Tony Spare has said this. It can be used for a good and it can be used for bad. In other words, here's some good technology, and while you guys are busy with this, we have other things that's, you know, it's why we have bombs and why we have wars, and these are just distractions for us.
You know, something interesting somewhat goes along with the topic, but I'm going to squirrel off just a little bit. When we did our Roswell episode, Nick, something we didn't talk about that I wish we would have. Do you know what 2 major technologies happened after Roswell?
One was fiber op, wasn't it?
Fiber optics was one. Do you know what the second big one was?
GPS?
Transistors.
And
when you think about it, fiber optics was used as a more efficient way of passing energy and information, and transistors did the same thing.
So this is the spread of knowledge that this is really pushing forward.
And a lot of people say that UFOs and I guess the demonic realm, they're one and the same. They say that it's not something separate. And then you have other people that
I've heard that before.
Yeah, and then you've got other people that they say, well, there's no such thing as really demonic, as in they're not horrible people, and there's no such thing as UFOs. They're part of this class of alien that is really neither. but like humans, you've got good and bad. And a lot of people then take that back to the Anunnaki and, the Emerald tablets and all that stuff. But, at the end of the day, I always say none of us really has a clue. But when we talk about demonic, there's never positive. There's never positive.
Right. Just,
so,
yeah.
I don't know. It's very interesting, though.
For the first time in history, the Vatican now has their own paranormal research department. And they said it's strictly paranormal and nothing to do with any type of aliens or anything like that. They're not admitting to that portion of it, but they are putting together their own investigative team and kind of like what we're doing over here, but it's going to be on a higher level because they are the Vatican. But it was a world announcement, and it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So yeah, I think they're trying to ready the masses.
Well, they've got infinite funding, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
Like they got no money problems.
No money issues.
Laura was outside doing laundry one day, leaving Marcia as well as Joey inside the house.
Right back in.
Now, as soon as Laura shut the back door, Marcia came running out of her bedroom, offering Joey candy and heading towards the cellar. Now, Joey hesitated. He felt a cold chill as Marcia and the family cat Sam descended the stairs of the basement. The cellar had always given Joey an uneasy feeling, a sense of dread that he just couldn't shake.
I saw her open the cellar door. So I got a cold chill. I didn't like the cellar, and the cellar to me was a bad place. So she goes, "Come on." Sam was behind her, and they both went down the stairs. So I get up, and I'm kind of slowly walking towards the cellar door.
As Joey approached the cellar, he could see Marcia and Sam standing at the bottom of the stairs. She was calling to him to join them. Despite Marcia's promise of candy, Joey felt an overwhelming sense of fear.
All of a sudden, something grabbed me around my waist, and it was almost as if I had a tight grip. I was lifted off my feet, carried down the basement stairs. The whole time I was trying to grab at the railing to stop the momentum of me being taken down the cellar stairs.
An invisible force carried Joey down the stairs, slapping his hand away from the rail every time he tried to resist. He was released at the bottom of the stairs right in front of Marcia and Sam. Out the corner of his eye, he saw a black mass that retreated to the corner of the basement, disappearing into the darkness.
Marcia said, "They're my friends. They want to be your friend. Let them be your friend. Let them be your friends. You're going to let them be your friends? Tell them they can be your friends." And I started saying it, "Okay, you can be my friends."
As Joey reluctantly repeated Marcia's words, the black mass shot from the corner of the room and forced itself right down his throat. It made him choke. He was unable to breathe. It was a horrifying experience, one that seemed to last forever. Eventually, Marcia would break the cycle. She would do this by moving boxes in the basement. She ended up finding a box of candy canes that Laura was saving to put back up on the tree each year. She called over to Joey. "Joey, come here. Hold out your shirt." Now she's piling candy canes into his shirt. They hurried back up the stairs, eager to leave the basement behind. Once they were in the living room, Marcia had Joey standing in the middle of the room. "Hold your arms out," she would say. Joey reluctantly held his arms out, and she would begin hanging the candy canes on his clothes. She would do this while dancing around him.
And then she started dancing around me and singing Jingle Bells. And it was better than what was just happened down in the basement. She was happy, she was singing. So I'm looking straight ahead, and she's singing Jingle Bells, and all of a sudden there's two voices singing Jingle Bells. And I look down, and Sam is dancing around the back of her, around me, and there's two voices singing Jingle Bells. Marcy was saying that she taught Sam to talk.
Joey's experience in the basement was terrifying, but the strange events that was happening in the front room was probably equally as scary. The sight of Marcia dancing around and singing with Sam the cat, and that joining with that second voice, left Joey with a deep sense of unease. It was clear that the forces at play at the Gooden household were far beyond his understanding, setting the stage for even darker events to come. When Laura returned, she was more annoyed by the mess in the basement than anything else. Marcia tried to get Sam to sing in front of Laura, but the cat refused to perform. Despite Marcia's best efforts to coax him into dancing and the same playful antics that they shared earlier, Sam remained silent.
Sam was singing loud, and there was two voices. It was hers and it was Sam's. There's two voices singing together, but he wouldn't do it that day in front of Laura.
Now, Sam's newfound ability to talk, it seemed to vanish whenever Laura was around, leaving her skeptical of Marcia's claims. Yet, Joey couldn't shake the memory of hearing two distinct voices singing Jingle Bells. This eerie duet left a lasting impression on him. Later that night, Joey's mother picked him up. As they drove away, Joey found himself absent-mindedly singing Jingle Bells, Jingle Bells in the back seat. It was the middle of summer, and his mother was perplexed. Why would he be singing that song?
For some reason, it was stuck in my head. I'm sitting in the back seat of the car singing Jingle Bells as my mother's driving down the street. And it was like, I don't know, August. It was August, or it was in the summer. And my mother's like, what are you singing Jingle Bells for?
Jingle bells, jingle bells.
That's spooky.
That's a little creepy. I know this is going to be Nick's favorite section of the story.
I was just going to say, this is the creepiest and my favorite segment of the whole thing, because it's got two things that I'm really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing and the most pressing question I have is, Joe, after the shadow entered you, did you feel any different?
I felt like there was someone else looking through my eyes with me.
And did that stay around all the time?
All from that day forward. From that day up until roughly about 8 months ago, when we got the last of them out. But that was the day. And I felt I couldn't breathe. And I felt like I was being attacked, but now I saw what it is, because I saw it clearly as I turned my head and it shot from the corner, and it literally like jammed itself down my throat to the point where I was choking. And it seemed like it went on for a long time. Now, we were probably only down in that basement for maybe 10 minutes at the most, but it felt like an hour down there because of the events that happened. Because you couldn't even you couldn't think about time, what was happening, what was happening to me, what I was experiencing was just seemed to kind of stop time.
Now, they were waiting and they needed you to let them in, sort of. So you had to say, okay, I'll be their friend. Did you feel like they couldn't do that unless you said that?
Well, now I know better. That I extended the invitation, and I said it several times. And once I did that, my fear level went down a little bit. Like in my mind, I was thinking, well, just I figured I knew that something took me down them stairs, and now I knew something was going on that I couldn't understand. But something was really going on that was serious, and I didn't want to feel that fear that I was feeling anymore, because it was terrifying. When I was getting taken down them stairs, I felt like I was getting taken away to somewhere forever. I was being stolen.
It's probably better to be friends with something you're scared of than enemies with it too. I mean, that's kind of like yeah.
Right, that's what I figured. I figured that if I became their friends, they wouldn't, scare me and do things to me, anything that would be better than the situation that was unfolding around me.
Yeah, I think that's how I would think too. Like, that's a perfectly natural for a kid to think that.
But once I saw that the demon that day, that from when he dropped me down at the bottom of the stairs and shot into the corner, and then when he shot back at me, I mean, you're talking a blink of an eye is how fast it happened. You know, from being 20 feet away and blinking your eyes and it, right there in front of you. And you can make out every facial feature and see the eyes and see the face. Remember, it was a basement and it was a little darker down there.
Right.
So I was really able to get my first up close look at what I was dealing with.
Now, was it like a shadow out of space kind of thing, or did it look like a full solid form?
When it shot away from me, when it dropped me at the bottom of the stairs and shot into the corner, it was so fast. All I saw was like a black mass of a whoosh went by, and I kind of felt it when he shot. I felt the energy when he shot into that corner. But when he came, when I accepted them and you know, because, you know, I was like asking Marcy. Marcy knew what was going on. And I didn't know what was going on because she was way too relaxed and accepting of what was happening. So I knew she knew. And when it shot at me, right before it entered me, and put it that way, I saw the eyes and the facial features, and the smell was like of rotten meat. And as it's trying to get in me or getting in me, you know, all I could remember was gagging and not even being able to breathe.
You know what that reminds me of, Nick, is that haunting in Connecticut. Remember how in that story, I think the boy had the one that had the cancer or whatever. I believe that one of those entities entered him also, I believe through his nose or his mouth or something like that. I'd have to go back and look again, but that's kind of what it reminds me of a little bit. So I've always found that it seems like whenever we look at these stories, there's always common threads or common denominators. And that's what I always look for is this similar to this case, or is this the same as that case? Or one thing that's vastly different, and to be honest with you, Nick, I'm a little disappointed in you. I expected higher of you on this.
Oh, yeah?
You didn't mention that freaking cat once.
That's the second part. I'm not done yet.
I apologize. Go ahead. Continue on your path.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. You know the cat's one of my favorite parts.
Exactly.
Like, just to clarify, not a huge part of Joe's story, but I love cats. So was that the first time that the cat ever did anything bizarre around you, Joe?
What do you mean, the day that from the basement?
Yeah.
He would, if nobody was around, he would just come and like stay like a foot next to me if I was on the rug playing or something like that, and just keep looking at me. And I would not pay attention to him, but he had a piercing stare, and it kind of bothered me in the beginning because it made me feel uncomfortable that he constantly stared at me. This was before the basement and the singing and the talking.
Right. Was he that way to everyone or just to you?
Just to me. And at first, when he did this, when my mother first started bringing me there, and Laura would say, he's just getting to know you. He's just getting to know your scent. If you were around any dogs or, you know, and you're new in here, you know, new to him, and he's just getting to know, because I was kind of not scared, but uncomfortable, where Laura would see that I was a little bit distrust that he would come near me and just stay there, not do nothing, not rub against me like a cat, but just stay there and stare at me. for a long period of time. And they say cats have a short attention span. But he didn't have a short attention span, that's for sure.
With all the stuff that was going on in your life, was this your first, and this isn't supernatural or anything, but was this your first experience with being around a cat a lot of the time?
Yeah, it really was. At that point, my mother had gotten a cat a few years later. It was a mean Siamese cat, but yeah, Sam was really my first experience. And, you know, that day that Marcy tried to get him to sing when Laura came in the house, she had went out the back door and went and hung some clothes out or something. Then she ended up coming through the front door, but she had the mail in her hand. And I think she was outside talking to one of the neighbors for a few minutes. So we had a little time between going down to the basement, coming back up, and this whole thing transpiring. By the time she had come in is what I'm saying. So, but she, as much as Marcy tried that day, I mean, she was really encouraging Sam by dancing around and, you know, and then Marcy kept, when Sam wouldn't sing, Marcy would say, tell Mom Sam sang, tell her, Joey, tell her, Joey. And I did. I shook my head. Yeah, he sang Jingle Bells, but it's two kids.
Right.
So, you know, at this point, she more or less dismissed it as a distraction of us going down and making a mess in the basement, moving all the boxes and, you know, digging out the candy canes. And she was more irritated about that. So I think she thought we were just throwing that up as a roadblock to distract her. But that was the first day that Sam spoke and sang. And that day went into even, I knew that day when this happened between the basement and then what happened upstairs. And it was the way Sam was singing Jingle Bells. It was a very scary voice. It was something like a 90-year-old raspy man singing completely out of key. And every word he sang kind of cut through you like a knife because it wasn't pleasant, is what I'm trying to say.
Like he was trying to be menacing, maybe.
Yeah, and I just had a bad feeling that there was more bad stuff going to happen that day, and I was right.
One of the most important questions I've got on this segment, Joe, did you get to eat any of the candy canes?
No. Laura put them all back in the box. They were probably, who knows, 5 years old or something. They probably wouldn't have been. I know they say candy canes last forever, but no, we definitely didn't get rewarded.
Dang it.
Yeah, there were no rewards that day at all.
Man, this is just a bad day all the way around.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Man.
Yeah, this is the most terrifying segment that I can picture in my head, because I picture it like a movie and all this stuff happening, and this is the part where they'd show part of it in the trailers because it's so horrifying.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, it's like it was that day. Before that day, it was just all the small stuff. Things being moved around, things not being found, and it went all of a sudden into like full launch at that point from the day that we went down in the basement. I accepted them. Sam did this and spoke and then it just went even worse that day. But from that day, going back to what you had said, I never felt alone after that. They were the day that I accepted them in was the day that they used me as a vehicle, basically, for 50 years, just jumping off and doing what they were going to do.
The only way I can think to describe that, like not experiencing it, but it sounds like it would be tiring, like that would wear you down. like never being alone all the time.
Yeah, well, that comes later on in the story. I don't want to give that part away, but yeah, it becomes to the point where you try acceptance.
Mm.
And I know that's not, and I don't, anybody out there, if you feel like you're under any kind of attack from the demonic realm, do not open up and accept 100%, hoping that it's going to get better, because that acceptance just gives them more power over you. And that, I tried it and it didn't work. I tried everything. Yes, I got very tired and would have done anything to have it end.
Now, one of the things that I do want to mention to everyone that listened in that last segment, Joe's audio started doing that chirping noise. It's almost like a interference. That was the beginning of a lot of the problems that I had on my podcast when we first started doing this segment, was the Sam the Cat, which I find that interesting because it was Sam the Cat, Jeff the Mongoose episode for us, which we called the Cursed episode, Nick. We did it a lot differently. This is a completely different format than how we did this the first time. We was just letting Joe tell the story the first time. I'm glad we're doing it this way, as much as I hate to say we lost the stuff we had before, because now I feel like we're having a casual conversation versus just trying to get the whole entire story out there. You know what I'm saying? But the audio sounded like what you guys just heard, that little bit of chirping. I was able to correct most of it. But in the segment that I recorded for Deceptive Reality, it was so bad you couldn't even make out entire words.
Yeah, and this is a completely different setup, remember, so it's weird that can keep happening at all.
Correct.
It seems like key points throughout whatever we were using the broadcast on, key points in the story seem to I don't know.
They got way worse.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Way worse.
Yeah. The story was never supposed to be told. And especially correcting a lot of the inaccuracies that were in some of the original reports that were completely untrue. A lot of the reason why I come out finally was not only because I'm the last one that actually knows what really happened in that house, and not just during the daytime, because I slept there. And that's when everything really started, is during those morning hours in the AM. And that followed me for 50 years. Didn't matter where I tried to run, from Bridgeport to Boston to South Carolina, back to Boston to Florida. I guess you could say I owned them, or they owned me.
Definitely a tough part. Speaking of which, we're going to move on to the next segment. The one thing that I will say is, if those of you are listening or watching wherever you are and you've got little kitlins along, some childrens, next segment you might want to skip out on. Maybe I'll put like a little timestamp of, hey, go to this. I feel like this is Mel's Hole all over again. But I'll put a little thing showing maybe a section to skip with the kiddos. I tried to edit as much of this out as I can, but there might be some things in there you don't want your kids to hear, is how I'll put it.
If kids are listening to our show, be warned, your kids will end up like us.
Yes, for sure.
This is a good way to mess up your kids.
Returning to Federal Street that night thrust Joey right back into a dangerous environment. You see, the apartment was a constant hub of chaos. There was parties that was happening all around the clock. It was a place where safety was a distant memory. There was danger lurking around every single corner. The next morning, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. Joey's asleep in his bedroom. I don't know how he slept in there. But about 2 o'clock in the morning, his door was busted wide open. It was violently kicked in by a 300-pound man. The man came in, grabbed him by the hair of the head, and started dragging him out of his bed. His mother had done something to anger some of the gang members, and they decided to make Joey a witness to their retaliation. The gang members even forced Joey to watch what they did to his mother. They even included him in some of the horrific deeds. Every time Joey tried to look away or to lower his head in shame, they would grab him by the hair of the head and force him to watch. The ordeal seemed to last forever. When it was over, the same man picked Joey up and tossed him into the bedroom like a rag doll. The door slamming shut behind him, leaving Joey in a state of shock and horror. What human would do this? What human would make a child watch such a thing? Who was really being punished? The son watching, or the mother knowing that his son is being forced to watch? Joey, deep down inside, he didn't believe that this is something that a human would do.
I knew it was them. I mean, I knew it was the demons. I knew it was them because it was way over the line. It was over the line for any human being to do that. It's a memory I've tried to bury most of my life. And it's hard. This is probably the hardest part of the story for me.
The day after, Joey's mother brought him back over to Laura's house. She was visibly upset, tears streaming down her face. Laura was concerned. She said, "What's wrong?" But Joey's mother, she could barely get the words out.
Laura is saying, "Denise, what's wrong? Denise, what's wrong?" And my mother said, something bad happened, and she didn't get into details.
Joey's mother went to the Bridgeport police station to report what happened. Their response was less than sympathetic. The police laughed at her. They dismissed her claims outright. They cited all the times that they had been over there and all the fights and all the objects that was thrown and all the insults that was hurled towards them, so they refused to help. They saw it as in, well, you caused this. You give us a hard time when we do show up, so you'll figure it out. Now, things was not better at the Gooden household. Joey, he was in a state of shock. He was unresponsive, unable to hear or even to comprehend what was happening around him. Laura was attempting to communicate with him, but all she would be met with was a blank stare.
I was like I was deaf. I didn't even know what I was after that night. What did I do wrong? No, what did I do? I did something bad for them to do these things to me.
Even though everybody was trying to make conversation with Joey, no one was getting through. No one except for Joey and Joey's mom knew exactly what happened that night. At least, that's what Joey thought.
Sam came over to me and said, "What happened, Joey boy? What happened, Joey boy?" I was in shock. I couldn't hear anything anybody else was saying, but Sam kept coming over to me, repeating that maybe 10, 20 times, and sometimes laughing in between.
Sam's repeated questioning and mocking laugh only made things worse. The cat's voice was never constant. It always sounded different, which added to the unsettling nature of the encounters. Sam's ability to speak and his apparent knowledge of Joey's traumatic experiences, it further blurred the line between our world and another.
What a segment, man. That one gets to me every time I listen to it.
I'll tell you, I'm glad you made the segment a little longer than where I think I would have cut it, because listening to that, I get this awful lump in my throat.
Yeah.
And I tear up a little bit just hearing it.
Yeah. It's definitely one of the harder parts that I had to record initially, because as a child, being vulnerable and dealing with the things that children have to deal with, and they think it's the worst possible thing ever, to go through that experience, take away the demons and everything paranormal, to go through that experience in general, that's emotions that is a life-forming memory. And by far, probably the hardest part of the story for Joe to talk about generally.
Yeah, I don't want to ask really a lot of questions about this, Joe, just to say I'm sorry this happened to you, and the police and the gang and everyone. That's just evil, like the kind of evil that shouldn't exist in this world.
No, you know, I had to, believe this or not, one of the requirements really for me to get the last of the demons out was I had to forgive all of them, including my mother. But I had to include and forgive all those people that did that to me, because it's the only way I was finally able to get some sort of peace, get that hatred out of me that I had for what they did. Because I really know that as bad as they were, it wasn't them. And I believe it was just all part of a plan. It was almost already all laid out for me to just follow through with what was going to happen. You know, but I knew that day when Sam sang and when I got taken down the stairs and when I felt another presence looking through my eyes with me, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. And I knew something was happening, and now I was starting to understand a little bit of what it was. Because, you know, kids hear about ghosts, and, you know, we love, you know, kids love ghost stories and things of that nature. But, you know, a scary ghost story couldn't touch what really happened.
For sure.
Yeah, reality is sometimes worse.
1,000 times worse.
No, I mean, this isn't the type of ghost story you would tell a mess of campers, because there's too much graphic and there's too much horrific stuff in there that it would have to be greatly toned down. And basically, I've done the best I can to not get too explicit, but it was one of the most horrible experiences I ever went through. I didn't know what my self-worth was for a long time in my life, because that relived itself daily as 40 years later, as if it was just happening again, just thinking about it. So that was the biggest hurdle in my life right there. Of everything that really happened, was that was supposed to be the most traumatic thing. And it really is, but it's not as traumatic anymore, because, you know, forgiving and getting rid of it, you have to get rid of it somehow. And to walk around with a balled up fist for 50 years waiting to sock somebody in the jaw. I mean, you know, talking about the paranormal, it doesn't end that way.
Yeah, you got to do it for yourself, not so much for them. But that must have been difficult.
Yeah, it was, but I admit I felt a lot better after that happened. I felt a sense of peace. You know, I realized it wasn't my fault. It was unfortunate, and it's something that I'm going to still trying to make me a better person.
It makes sense. I mean, I'm kind of like Nick on this one. I didn't have a lot of questions. The only thing that I was really going to question in this entire segment is, you know, the cat at the end. Obviously, when we talk about Sam again, it was almost like icing on a cake to a degree, because then you feel like, if anything, you were a part of something that was so horrific, and it would have just been between you and your mother. And now all of a sudden you understand, at least at that moment, that there was way more people that was involved in that situation. If anything, just as someone watching and being a bystander. which also I'm assuming
Yeah, all those entities.
yeah, being very dramatic because again, that's something that kind of stays with you, I think. But if you guys are cool, I would like to go to the next segment. I don't want to dwell too much on that because it's such a sad section.
Yeah, you got to edit my eyes out of that last segment there. I don't want people to see that.
Yeah, for sure. But if y'all are ready,
All right, I'm all right, Nick. I'm all right.
I know. You're a good man. I appreciate what you've gone through.
yeah,
I'm just tenderhearted.
for sure. All right, on to the next one. Well, I told you I was going to be a two-parter, and what a crazy... I mean, we're on part one, and it's crazy. Part two, if you listen to my original podcast, you obviously know what's coming up. Joe answers so many questions in ways that I didn't assume that he would. And in a couple of times, Nick and I actually asked questions that we thought we knew the answer to, and we did not.
But we were wrong.
We were wrong.
We were
Listen,
wrong.
Occasionally we're wrong.
Mostly me.
I mean, it was mostly Nick. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No, it was though.
But
I misinterpreted things and I needed to know.
But it's crazy. I mean, some of the answers he gave, I would not have expected.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say here why, because it's coming up in the next two parts. So I got to come back.
Spoilers.
But man, hopefully you enjoyed this though. It goes without saying, obviously, I feel like I have to say this though. The current owner of the address contacted me. This was last week in my time, which is like a month from now. Because of certain people that's creating videos, people's going to the address. Don't go to the address. Don't do it. There's nothing there. We confirmed in part 2, there's no demons there. Just don't go there. I'm not even going to say the number of the house. Also, don't look up the number on the house. Just stay away. Just listen to our podcast, okay? Live vicariously through our podcast.
Yeah, there's just people who are unrelated to this trying to live there. There's nothing happening. They probably don't even know much about it. Just leave them be.
Correct. They should have complete peace and quiet like Joe has tried to get for the last 50 years. But we definitely appreciate everyone that's done this ride with us. It's been an absolute stellar part 1. You're going to love part 2. But until we see you on the next podcast, make sure you click the little thumbs up button, rate us wherever you're rating, and then we'll talk to you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.